can't figure out the damn door. You see how that door will come in on that side of the church?
Yeah, I don't know how to open something. I don't know.
I didn't see no door swing.
I don't know how to open. I don't know how to open.
Shit on. All right, man, just see something. And look around, them damn blue lights and them some bitches are just like that, they come out.
Yeah, I know. You can't believe it. You can't make people believe it.
I paralyzed right there. I couldn't
They won't believe it on these days. They won't believe it on these days. Might be too late.
What you just heard is a recording. October 11th, 1973, a little after 11 at night, inside the Jackson County Sheriff's Department in Mississippi. Two men have been left alone in an interview room. They were told the officers stepped out for coffee. They believed no one is listening. There was a microphone hidden in the desk. Now, to understand why two grown men sounded like that, go back a few hours to a riverbank. 8 o'clock at night on the bank of the Pascagoula River. It's October. The air is cool and dead still. There's a moon almost completely full sitting over the water, and the light of it is bright enough that you can see your own shadow in the mud. Two men are fishing. One is 42, the other is 18. They've been out here about an hour, catching nothing, saying very little. The way men fish when they are tired from a long shift and just, need the quiet. Then, from somewhere behind them, comes a sound. The older man would later describe it as a zipping noise, a whirring, steam forced through a valve. He turns towards it. Out over the water, there is a light that was not there a second ago. Two of them, actually. Blue and flashing, and under the lights, an object. Oval, the size of a small house, hanging maybe 2 feet off the ground, not touching anything, not making a sound right now except the faint hiss of those lights. A panel on the side of it slides up, not sideways, but up. And three things come out. They don't walk. The older man is very specific about this for the rest of his life. They do not walk. They do not have feet that move. They glide, level and smooth, across mud that should be sucking at anything that crosses it. They're about 5 feet tall. Their skin is gray and wrinkled and loose, like the hide of an elephant. They have no eyes, and where a nose should be, where ears should be, there are three stiff little growths, sticking straight out like carrots. The hands are not hands, they're pincers, like a crab. The younger man takes one look, and his body simply switches off. He faints standing up. And the older man cannot move at all. His arms have gone numb, his legs have gone numb, and the three gray things are gliding straight toward the two of them across the moonlit mud. And the only sound on the whole river is that thin, hissing whine. 45 years later, on the other side of the river, a dying man will tell his wife that the exact same thing happened to them. They never told anyone, and that they were afraid. But that's getting ahead of it. Welcome back to Paranormal Directive 13. I am your host, Matt, and it's been a while since we've talked about aliens. Now, over the past few months, we've spent time in haunted houses, chasing cryptids through dark forests, dug through some conspiracies, followed ghosts in the places most people would rather avoid. But eventually, every road in the paranormal seems to circle back to the same question. Are we alone? Tonight, we're adding back into one of the most compelling alien encounters ever reported. Not because of blurry photographs, not because of government leaks, not because somebody claimed to see a light in the sky. Because two ordinary men walked into a sheriff's office in Mississippi, sat down in separate rooms, and told the same impossible story. And when investigators secretly recorded them, believing they were about to expose a hoax, the mystery only got deeper. And one quick note before we dive into tonight's case: if you enjoy Paranormal Directive 13, consider leaving a rating or a review on whatever podcast app that you listen to. It only takes like 10 seconds and it really helps other people find the show, and it genuinely does make a difference. This is the Pascagoula Abduction.
Sometimes life will get you stressed out. Lucky you can always count on text now. Free talk, free text, free 5G, and they'll never shut you off. 'Cause like I said, it's free. Text Now's got your back. Nationwide, no long-term contracts. But all they nervous about losing service. Text Now's got your back. That's their sense of purpose. No matter what comes next, you've got free talk and text with the Text Now app. Download it today.
Wireless plans require the purchase of a SIM card. Visit textnow.com for terms and conditions.
Do you keep hearing podcast ads, like this one, for example, but always wonder how you actually get involved with them for your own brand or organization? Well, it's easier than you think. We're Acast, and we give you the platform to do it all yourself. Browse thousands of popular podcasts, choose the shows that match your perfect audience, set your budget, and launch. And if you want a hand, our podcast specialists are there to help you launch with confidence. This is podcast advertising without barriers. Get started at acast.com/advertise.
Now, to understand what supposedly happened on that riverbank, you have to understand the town it happened next to, because Pascagoula, Mississippi in 1973 is not a sleepy little nowhere. It's a working town, and it's a loud one. The Gulf Coast here runs on steel. There's the F.B. Walker shipyard, where our two men work. And just down the way, there's Ingalls, one of the biggest military shipbuilders in the country. The place that builds warships and, at the time, was deep in the business of nuclear submarines. So you've got this strange split-screen geography. On one side, the constant mechanical hammer of heavy industry around the clock. And right up against it, going quiet and black at the edges, the bayous and channels of the Pascagoula River moving slow toward the Gulf. And in the fall of 1973, something is going on in the skies over the American South. From late September into October, there is what UFO researchers call a flap, a cluster of sightings, dense and regional, all happening close together. Mississippi, Louisiana, Tennessee, hundreds of reports of strange lights and unexplained objects. It's in the papers. People are calling police stations. Whatever you believe about any single sighting, the fact is that in this corner of the country, in this particular autumn, a lot of ordinary people are looking up and seeing things they can't explain. That's the backdrop. Charles Hickson is 42 years old, born in Jones County, Mississippi in 1931. He grew up fishing with his father on Tallahassee Lake, an outdoorsman his whole life. He served 20 months in the Army during the Korean War in real combat and came home with 5 battle stars. After the war, he was a constable back in Jones County, an elected lawman. And when the door factory he worked at shut down, he moved his wife Blanche and his kids to the coast to take a job at the shipyard. This is not a man with a reputation for being flighty. He's a church-going, hard-working Korean War combat veteran and former peace officer. That profile is going to come up over and over again, because it's the single hardest thing about this case for skeptics to get around. Calvin Parker is 18. He was born in Texas, grew up poor in Sandersville, Mississippi, and he'd recently come down to Pascagoula to work alongside Hickson. By every account, he's a quiet kid, sensitive, not a talker. He's barely an adult, and he has been on this earth for 18 years, and he is about to have the worst night of his life. A night that's going to follow him, hunt him, for the next half century. It's Thursday, October 11th. The two men knock off work and decide to fish to unwind. They drive out to an old abandoned spot on the west bank of the East Pascagoula River, a derelict piece of industrial shoreline tucked between the Louisville and Nashville Railroad Bridge to the north and the Highway 90 bridge to the south. The location is worth being precise about. This is not deep woods. This is not some remote mountaintop where a lone witness sees a light no one else could have seen. They're fishing in a relatively noisy semi-industrial corridor, with a railroad bridge on one side and a federal highway on the other, on a riverbank that workers and drivers and fishermen pass all the time, and under a moon putting out about 99% of its light. If someone wanted to invent a place where a man could hallucinate a spaceship with nobody around to contradict him, this is basically the opposite of that place. The ground is soft mud scattered with concrete blocks, scrap metal, and the rotting stumps of old pier pilings. The sun went down around 5:35, and by now it's full dark except for that enormous moon. The river is glassy, there's almost no wind. They've been out about an hour, catching nothing. And then comes the sound. Hickson hears it first, and there's the craft. Oval, 30 to 40 feet across, 8 to 10 feet tall, hovering a couple feet above the ground with 2 blue lights pulsing on it. He estimates it's only yards away, and while he's standing there trying to make his brain accept what his eyes are sending it, the opening appears on the side, and the 3 of them come out, gliding. Parker goes down. He's 18 years old. He looks up from his fishing line and sees 3 eyeless gray things gliding across the mud toward him, and his body makes a decision his mind doesn't get a vote in. He faints or close to it. His account is that he was aware in flashes, but the terror was total and immediate, and most of what follows he does not see. He told it the same way for the rest of his life. His arms locked up, he couldn't move, and then the lights went out on him. He would describe the moment as the closest he ever came to dying, and this is a man who would later serve in the Marine Corps. Whatever came across that mud frightened an 18-year-old so completely that his nervous system simply refused to stay online for it. Hickson stays conscious, he just can't move. He describes total paralysis, a numbness that comes the instant the things touch him. 2 of them take hold of him. The 3rd takes Parker. And then, and this is the part that decades later he will still be insisting on, voice shaking on national television, they lift the 2 men off the ground and carry them into the craft. Inside, Hickson says, the light is everywhere and comes from nowhere. No bulb, no source. He's suspended in the air, horizontal and weightless, floating a few feet off the floor. And then something comes out of the wall. He describes it as a device about the size and shape of a football, 6 to 8 inches across, that floats free and begins to move over his body. Up his chest, under him, down his back, methodical, back and forth. He calls it an eye, a big mechanical eye, scanning him. And there's one detail I want to give the exact way he gave it, because it's the kind of thing people don't make up. Hickson is a lifelong Mississippi outdoorsman. He has spent his entire life around the water and the swamps. He said the device made a sound, a low, rhythmic, throbbing buzz. And the thing he reached for to describe that sound, the closest thing in his entire experience, was the call a male alligator makes during mating season. That's not really a detail you find in science fiction movies in 1973. That is a detail you find in a man who has actually heard a bull gator in the spring and is grabbing for the only sound he's ever heard that came close. The examination lasts 20, maybe 30 minutes. No one speaks, there are no words at all. But Hickson says he felt something, a sense of being monitored, examined, by something that knew exactly what it was doing and had no interest in him as a person. Then, as suddenly as it started, it was over. The things carry the 2 men back out and set them down in the mud. Hickson's legs won't hold him. He collapses, and the craft goes straight up and is gone in a fraction of a second. Hickson crawls over to Parker, who's coming around on the mud, hyperventilating, sobbing, repeating that he wants to go home, that he wants a doctor. He's a teenager who has just had his arms locked up and his consciousness taken from him, and now he's lying in the dark of a riverbank trying to breathe. Hickson is shaking so hard he can't function either. He keeps a bottle of whiskey in the car and he drinks 3 quick shots, not to celebrate, not for fun, but because his hands are trembling too violently to drive. Now that whiskey is going to get used against him within a couple hours. Now the 2 of them have to decide what to do, and here's the first thing most people get wrong about this case. They did not run to the police. Their first instinct was to drive to the office of the local newspaper, the Mississippi Press. They wanted to tell a reporter. Part of it was that Hickson, a Korean War veteran, former constable, Cold War American, had it in his head that this might be a national security matter, something the public needed to know about. But the newspaper office was dark, locked up for the night. So, second choice, they drive to the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. It's around 11 at night when they walk in, and whatever you think happened on that riverbank, what happens next inside the sheriff's office is, to me, the single strangest and most important hour of this entire story. The men on duty are Sheriff Fred Diamond and Captain Glenn Ryder, and they do exactly what you would do. They don't believe a word of it. Ryder smells whiskey on Hickson the moment he comes in. 2 shipyard workers stumbling in at 11 at night with a story about claw-handed monsters from a flying saucer. Of course it is a drunk prank, or a publicity stunt, or both. But Ryder is a careful man, and after talking to them a while, he revises that first impression. He decides they're not drunk. Rattled, yes, but drunk, no. So the deputies do something clever. They separate the 2 men and question them apart, looking for the story to fall apart. Looking for the 2 versions to contradict each other the way a made-up story always does. But the versions match. And then they do something even more clever. And this is the moment the whole case turns on. The officers put Hickson and Parker together in a room. They tell them they're stepping out to get some coffee, and they leave. But before they go, they switch on a hidden tape recorder tucked in a desk drawer with the microphone running. Their reasoning is simple and honestly pretty sound. If this is a hoax, the second these 2 men think they're alone and unobserved, they'll drop the act. They'll laugh. They'll say something like, "Can you believe they're buying this?" The tape will catch them with their guard down and the whole thing will be over. But that is not what's on the tape.
This she's had a heart attack tonight, ain't she?
Well, I know.
I come on down and
I'm not scared me to death, too, so.
I'm just laying there crying right now. I can't
I
tell
know, but it's something that you can't get over in a lifetime, see? Jesus Christ.
Most of them bad about it, nobody believes. That's
And
what
I
I'm
thought I had been through enough of hell on this earth, and now I have to go through something like that, see? But they could have, I guess they could have harmed us, son. They could have done anything to us if they didn't hurt me.
maybe why they just picked that up.
I don't know.
So that is a section of the recording of Hickson and Parker. And what's on that tape are 2 men who believe they're completely alone in genuine distress talking to each other. This recording is real and it exists. It is on YouTube. At one point, Parker, panicking, says he's getting sick and has to get out of there. At no point, not once in the entire recording, does either man so much as hint that any of this is invented. There's no wink, there's no break in it. And when the deputies came back and listened to that tape, the whole tenor of the investigation changed. They were no longer dealing with 2 men they suspected of lying. They were dealing with 2 men who were terrified out of their minds of something they believed had actually happened to them. Now, the skeptics have an answer for the tape. The argument goes like this. Hickson was a former constable. He's been around law enforcement. A man like that might well assume that a room in a sheriff's station is bugged. That's exactly the kind of thing a lawman would know. So the skeptics say the conversation could be a performance. 2 men staying in character because they suspected the tape was rolling. And it's a fair point about Hickson, but it's a much harder point to make about Calvin Parker. Because Parker is 18 and he's hyperventilating. His voice is cracking. He is begging for a doctor and for nerve pills and talking about going crazy. To believe the tape is staged, you have to believe that a quiet, sheltered teenager with no acting training in the middle of the night under interrogation produced a flawless, sustained performance of acute panic and trauma, convincing enough that 2 career lawmen who were actively trying to catch him in a lie walked away believing him. Maybe. People have done stranger things, but that's the weight the skeptic has to carry on this. Now, the next morning, the story leaks, and it does not stay local for long. But before the circus arrives, there's a quieter development that I think gets badly overlooked. On October 12th, the very next day, Hickson and Parker are taken to Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi. There, military technicians run a radiation check on both men and their clothing. And the results come back clean. No abnormal radiation. So on its face, that sounds like a footnote. But think about the procedure for a second. These are 2 civilians, 2 shipyard workers. Under normal protocol, an active Air Force installation does not bring random civilians on base to medically evaluate them for radiation exposure because they saw a UFO. Researchers who've looked at this have flagged it as genuinely unusual, the kind of thing that suggests somebody somewhere up the chain took the report seriously enough to want these two men checked. And the official Air Force program for investigating UFOs, Project Blue Book, had supposedly been shut down 4 years earlier in 1969. So who exactly ordered the radiation sweep? And under what authority? That's a thread that never quite gets tied off. The Air Force, for its part, would go on to state that it found no evidence the Pascagoula report was a hoax or a fabrication, so make of that what you will. On October 20th, the heavy hitters of UFO research arrive. The most important is our man, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the brains behind Blue Book. So if you're not familiar with Hynek was an astronomer. He had been the United States Air Force's own scientific consultant on UFOs. The man originally brought in to debunk sightings and explain them away as weather balloons and swamp gas. And over the years, the cases he couldn't explain turned him from a skeptic into the most credible scientific voice in the field. When Hynek showed up, it meant a case was being taken seriously by a serious person. Hynek came with Dr. James Harder, an engineering professor who used hypnosis in his investigations. They interviewed Hickson and Parker, including under hypnosis. And afterward, they went in front of the press and said, in plain language, that whatever had happened to these men, the men had clearly been through a real and terrifying experience. They weren't laughing. They were not calling it a hoax. Then, at the end of October, Hickson takes a polygraph. And the examiner's conclusion is carefully worded, and that wording does matter. Hickson, he said, was telling the truth as to what he believed. Now, a believer hears that and says, see, he passed, he's not lying. And a skeptic will hear that exact same sentence and say, right, as to what he believed, which is not the same thing as what objectively happened. A polygraph can't tell the difference between a man reporting a real event and a man sincerely reporting a hallucination he's convinced was real. Both of those readings are honest readings of that result. The polygraph narrows the field. It makes deliberate hoax much less likely, but it does not and cannot settle what actually happened on the riverbank. Now, I want to come back to that regional flap, because Pascagoula did not happen in a vacuum, and the corroboration around it is denser than most people realize. Start with the same night, around 8 o'clock, roughly when the encounter is said to have begun, and about 3 hours before Hickson and Parker ever reached the sheriff. A service station operator named Larry Booth phoned the Jackson County Sheriff's Department to report a strange craft with blinking lights passing overhead. That call is logged before the two men walk in. Booth had no way of knowing what was about to be reported from the riverbank. He just saw something and called it in. Then there's the object in the river itself. On November 6th, less than a month later, local fishermen on the Pascagoula reported a glowing object underwater. A metallic thing around 5 feet across, putting out an amber beam moving under its own power at 4 to 6 knots. The accounts say that when it was poked at, it went dark, then lit back up. And this is what researchers call a USO, an unidentified submerged object. Now that is currently now lumped into UAPs, even though they are underwater. So UAP is unidentified aerial phenomenon, and from my understanding, USOs are also lumped into the UAP category. But some people do still make a specific designation between the two. But now, because that river is right next to the Navy's nuclear submarine shipbuilding operation, the Navy did not ignore it. They sent a decorated Navy SEAL, Lieutenant Commander Craig Dorman, along with researchers from a naval lab to investigate. Their conclusion was that some unknown self-illuminated light source had genuinely been operating in that channel. And the folklore sits right alongside it. That same stretch of river has a name that goes back centuries. The locals call it the Singing River, and we'll get to why that name exists. The short version is that this specific water has been associated with strange sounds and strange phenomena since before there was a Mississippi. A man hears a buzzing hiss off the water in 1973. Less than a month later, the Navy is chasing down a glowing object under the same water. And the river already carried a reputation. 200 years old for making sounds nobody can explain. And then there's one more piece of physical strangeness attached to that night. And I'll flag it up front that this is one of those that is harder to nail down than the rest. On October 11th, a massive acoustic event, described as a thunderous boom, was reportedly felt across a wide swath of the country. The accounts say it broke windows in 3 states and registered on seismographs. And there's a claim, repeated in a number of tellings, that when Hickson and Parker got back to their car after the encounter, the windows were shattered. Now, I want to be straight with you guys about this, because part of this job is telling you which evidence is load-bearing and which isn't. The broken windows in 3 states boom and the shattered car windows are the shakiest items in the whole file. They get repeated a lot, and the dates and the details drift from telling to telling, and the connection to the abduction is more asserted than demonstrated. So I'm putting them in the story because they're part of the record people have built around the case. But I am flagging them as the part of the record I'd hold kind of the loosest. The tape, the polygraph, the Keesler check, the second witness sighting by Larry Booth, the USO, and the Navy investigation, those are solid. The boom is more of a decoration.
You've got social dialed in. Search is doing its thing. So why do your marketing results look the same as 6 months ago? That's because you're fishing in the same pond as everyone else. Podcast listeners are a different audience entirely. More engaged, harder to reach through traditional channels, and ready to act when someone they trust makes a recommendation. We're Acast, and we put them right in front of you. Browse thousands of the world's leading podcasts, book host reads or run your own ads, and track every conversion in real time. Same skills you already have, brand new results. Acast. Acast.com/advertise.
Now, no investigation episode is complete without the man who made it his life's work to tear cases like this apart. Philip J. Klass was an aviation journalist and the most prominent UFO debunker of his era. In 1975, he published a book declaring Pascagoula an elaborate hoax. His case rested largely on what he saw as inconsistencies and shifts in Hickson's early statements, and on Hickson's later turn toward publicity, the talk shows, the book. Klass was sharp, and his criticisms deserve a hearing, which is why they're going to anchor the theory we start with in a minute. But here's the structural problem Klass never fully solved, and that every hoax theory has still yet to solve. The secret tape. Klass's whole framework needs Hickson to be a calculating self-promoter. But the tape was made when Hickson and Parker believed they were alone, before there was any fame to chase, before there was a single dollar or a single TV booking on the table. You can argue Hickson got greedy later. The harder thing to argue is that he was acting in an empty room at midnight with a panicking teenager beside him for an audience he didn't know was listening. So that's the file, the tape, the matching accounts, the polygraph, the radiation check, the second witness, the object in the water. All of it circling one question nobody has closed in 50 years. What actually happened on that riverbank? Run the explanations honestly, from the most grounded and down-to-earth to the strangest material on the edge of the file. Every one of them has people who hold it sincerely. Every one of them has a hole. So theory 1, the elaborate hoax. The most conventional explanation. 2 men cook up a story for money and attention and ride it as far as it'll go. The supporting evidence is real. Hickson did lean into his fame. He did the talk shows. He wrote and sold a book. Klass pointed to small discrepancies in the early accounts. The strength of his theory is that it requires nothing supernatural at all, just human beings doing what human beings sometimes do. Now, the weakness is the one we keep circling back to. The secret recording made before any of the upside existed, capturing terror that neither man knew was being witnessed. And the weakness, too, is Calvin Parker, who did not lean into fame, who in fact fled from it. He joined the Marines to escape it and spent decades hiding from it. That is not the behavior of a co-conspirator cashing in. The unanswered question for the hoax theory, if it was a con, Why did one of the two con men spend the rest of his life running from the payoff? Now, theory 2 is sleep, dreams, and paralysis. A more sympathetic, skeptical model. The men, tired after a long shift, dozed on the bank, and one or both slipped into a hypnagogic state. That twilight zone between waking and sleep where the mind generates astonishingly vivid hallucinations. And the signature of that state is striking. People in it routinely report paralysis, the sense of being held down, dark humanoid figures in the room, floating sensations, and bright lights. Paralysis, figures, floating, lights, that is the Pascagoula encounter almost point for point. This is the same mechanism that, across cultures and centuries, has produced the night hag and the old witch sitting on your chest, the bedroom intruder. We just talked about it in the Smurl hunting case we did 2 weeks ago. But the weakness is the word both. Hypnagogia is a solitary experience, and I might be butchering the pronunciation of that, but I think I'm pretty close. But it's a solitary experience. It happens inside one sleeping brain. It does not explain how two men, awake and fishing, would slip into the identical waking dream at the identical moment and come out with matching descriptions of the same 3 impossible creatures. You can stretch it to cover one witness. Stretching it to cover 2 simultaneously is where it tends to snap. Theory 3 is the bottle, the simplest explanation of all. They were drunk and they misread some ordinary industrial light or craft on a busy river as a spaceship. Captain Ryder did smell whiskey on Hickson. And the case against it is pretty short because Ryder himself closed it. The officer who smelled the whiskey is the same officer who formally stated the men were not drunk. And Hickson's explanation for the alcohol, that he drank it after the encounter to stop his hands from shaking enough to drive, is consistent with everything else about that night. The bottle explains the smell. It does not explain the tape, the matching accounts, or the response of the professionals who evaluated these men sober hours and days later. And theory 4 is the trauma surrogate. This one is darker and more psychological, and it's worth stating pretty carefully. The idea is that something genuinely traumatic happened on that riverbank, but something human. An assault, a violent encounter, and that the mind, unable to process the real event, constructed a more bearable cover story over it. Not men, but monsters. Not a human crime, but something from the sky. And this actually fits known clinical patterns. Trauma victims do sometimes build surreal, displaced narratives to wall off an unbearable memory. The weakness is that there's no forensic trace of it. There's no physical evidence, no medical evidence, nothing at the site that points to a human-on-human assault. It's an elegant theory with nothing under it. It explains the emotional reality on the tape. These men were clearly traumatized by something, without being able to point to the something. Now, Theory 5 is where we get to the fun part. Theory 5 is extraterrestrial contact, and this is where we cross the line into the paranormal. And we start with the most famous version, that exactly what Hickson said happened. Visitors from somewhere else physically took 2 men and examined them. This is the model held by Hynek, by Harder, and by the researcher who worked most closely with the case in modern times, Philip Mantle. Their argument leans on the consistency of the accounts, including under hypnosis, and on the behavior of the entities. The clinical, detached, non-hostile scanning, which reads less like an attack and more like a sample being taken, biology being cataloged. And here's the strangest piece of evidence for the strangeness of these beings. The thing that, for a lot of researchers, actually argues against a hoax. If you were inventing aliens in 1973, you would invent the aliens everybody already knew. The Greys. Big head, huge black almond eyes. That template was already in the culture from the Betty and Barney Hill case in 1961. It was obvious, it was available, and it was a believable thing to lie about. Hickson and Parker described nothing like that at all. They described 5-foot creatures with no eyes at all, wrinkled gray elephant hide, 3 carrot-shaped stalks for a face, crab claws for hands, legs fused into a single trunk, beings that glided instead of walked. That description doesn't match the Greys. It doesn't match the reptilians, which are scaled and muscular and have eyes. It doesn't match the mantids, which are tall and insectoid. It is the complete opposite of the Nordics, who look like tall, beautiful humans. And it barely even matches a robot, because robots in the popular imagination are metal and riveted, and these things were soft and organic and wrinkled. The only close cousin in the whole catalog showed up that same month in October 1973, 2 states over. The so-called Falkville Metal Man in Alabama, a figure photographed in a reflective foil-like suit, moving with the same stiff, robotic, wrong gait. Same wave, same autumn, different state. And there's a quieter reading inside the extraterrestrial camp worth putting on the table, because it reframes the whole encounter. Some researchers have suggested the things on the riverbank may not have been the intelligence behind any of it. They may have been tools, like biological drones or robotic servants, manufactured probes, built or grown to do one job and sent out to do it. Look at what was actually described. Legs fused into a single trunk, hands that were rigid pincers instead of articulated fingers, movement that glided instead of walked, not one word spoken, and behavior that was purely task-oriented. Collect the specimen, scan it, return it. That's not how you'd really describe a curious traveler. That's how you would describe equipment. Under this reading, Hickson and Parker never met the visitors at all. They met the machinery the visitors sent, and the real intelligence stayed wherever it was, watching the data come back. It's an interpretation, not a conclusion, but it does account for the single strangest quality of the encounter, that the beings handled 2 terrified human beings with all the warmth of a forklift. So the believer's strongest card is this. These men described something that fit no existing template, that would have been a terrible choice for a hoax, and that has remained genuinely difficult to categorize for 50 years. The weakness, of course, is the one that haunts every case in this field. There's no craft, there's no body, there's no piece of metal, there's no physical proof. There is testimony, consistency, and trauma. And for the people who don't believe, testimony, consistency, and trauma will never be enough. And that's fair enough. But it's worth being honest that the description itself is one of the odder pieces of the puzzle in either direction. Now, Theory 6 is the doorway, not the spaceship. And this is the interdimensional or ultra-terrestrial model. And it's where the case kind of braids into the land itself. The beings didn't cross space from a distant planet. They came through from somewhere alongside our reality. And certain places on Earth are thin spots where that crossing is easier. Proponents point at this exact stretch of river, the instant paralysis, the levitation, the craft that didn't fly away as much as vanish straight up in a fraction of a second, the object under the same water weeks later, and a river that has for centuries been reported to sink. Pascagoula, they would say, isn't a place a spaceship happened to land. It's a thin spot, and the things that come through it have been coming through for a very long time, under older names than aliens. The weakness to that is that it explains everything and therefore proves nothing, and it treats folklore as if folklore were forensic evidence. But it answers the one question the nuts and bolts spaceship theory can't. Why this river? Why here? Why this water with the 200-year-old reputation? Now, Theory 7, and this is the last theory. These things were not from space at all. And this is the furthest edge of the file. 2 readings live out here, and they pull in opposite directions. The first is spiritual. A local pastor, Reverend Bill Riddick, preached a sermon within days of the encounter, framing the entities not as cosmic visitors, but as something older and darker. Malevolent forces wearing an alien mask. And the man who, across his long and painful life, drifted closest to that reading was Calvin Parker himself. The argument: these beings left no gift, no message, no hope. Only two men with lifelong trauma. The paralysis, the dread, the sense of being seized and examined by something that did not care about you. That's not the literature of friendly contact. It is almost exactly the literature of the night hag, the thing that comes in the dark, sits on your chest, and you cannot move and cannot scream. And the second reading of this theory is the opposite of spiritual. It's institutional. And the location all but hands it over to you. The river runs past one of the country's most sensitive military shipbuilding operations, nuclear submarines included. The fringe argument: what these men met wasn't from another world or another dimension, but it was ours. A classified test near a secure facility and two civilians who wandered onto the wrong riverbank at the wrong hour. The Kiesler radiation check, the redacted documents, the unusual official interest. To a proponent, those aren't signs of alien contact. They're signs of a government quietly checking whether two witnesses had seen something they weren't supposed to. Both claims are made by their proponents, presented exactly as that. Neither has evidence that would move a careful person from suspicion to belief. But the whole file includes the demon at one edge and the secret weapon at the other, standing on the same riverbank. Now, the theories are clean, and they sort the world into camps and hand you a side. The details don't really do that. And this is where I kind of empty my pockets. The small, strange pieces that rarely make it into the documentaries and the 3-minute videos. The ones that reward you for staying to the end. None of them prove anything, but all of them kind of stick with you a little bit. So there was a third one, and it was different. Now, almost every drawing you'll ever see of this case shows 3 identical elephant men. But that's not quite what Hickson described. He said 2 of the creatures were thick, bulky, and neckless. The third one was different. It had a distinct, slender neck, a smaller frame, and the way it moved struck him as, his word, feminine. He couldn't explain it better than that. 2 of them, and then a third that read to him as somehow female. Nobody's ever really known what to do with that detail, which is exactly why it's worth putting in this show. Also, going to the newspaper before the police. It tells you something about who these men were. Their first instinct, in the worst moment of their lives, wasn't to seek protection. It was to seek a witness. They drove to the newspaper office first. They wanted it on the record. Only when they found it locked did they go to the sheriff. Men running a hoax go where the spotlight is brightest. Men who think they've seen something the country needs to know about go to a reporter. So you decide which this was. And then Charles Hickson found kind of a role in this. Calvin Parker only found a wound. He was 18, quiet, sensitive, already poor, and overnight the whole region knew his face. He became a punchline, the alien boy. People pointed at him on the street. His work fell apart, and the anxiety was severe enough that, by every account, it never fully left him. The kind of thing we now describe in the language of PTSD. And so this teenager made a choice that tells you exactly how unbearable it had become. He enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. He chose boot camp. He chose the rigid machinery of the Corps as the calmer option, as a place to hide, because it was easier than staying in his hometown. And he kept hiding for most of his life. He changed jobs, he moved, he kept his head down, he did not talk about it, and did not want to be the man it happened to. While Hickson sat on a sidewalk selling the story, Parker spent decades doing the opposite, building a life out of not being recognized. He carried that single hour on the riverbank for 45 years before he was willing to set it down in public. And he did not break his silence until 2018, when he finally published his own account and let himself be the witness again. Now, that's not the arc of a man who pulled off a great prank and cashed in. A hoaxer enjoys the attention. Parker ran from it until he was an old man. Whatever happened on that riverbank, it did not give Calvin Parker fame or money. It took something out of him at 18 that he spent the rest of his life trying to get back. Now, the Singing River, because I promised you and because it may be the eeriest thread in the whole tapestry.
While every other channel is fighting for your customers' attention, podcasts are where they've already given it. No one accidentally listens to a podcast for 45 minutes. They choose to be here. They trust the voice in their ears, and when that voice talks about your brand, it doesn't sound like advertising. It sounds like a recommendation from a friend. Acast gives you that trust at scale. Digital precision, host-read authenticity, and performance data that proves it worked. Don't fight for attention. Buy it with Acast. Learn more by visiting acast.com/advertise.
For centuries, the Pascagoula River has been reported to make a sound, a low, throbbing hum that rises up off the water on calm, moonlit nights. The kind of night October 11th, 1973 was. People have compared it to a swarm of bees, or to the note you get rubbing a wet finger around the rim of a crystal glass. It's been documented for a very long time. French colonial accounts going back to the 1720s describe it. It is a genuine, if poorly understood, acoustic phenomenon, and it has a genuine and tragic legend attached to it. The legend says it's the Pascagoula tribe, a people whose name is said to mean bread eaters. The story goes that a princess of the neighboring Biloxi tribe, Enola, fell in love with Altama, a chief of the Pascagoula, and fled her own betrothal to be with him. It sparked a war, and the Pascagoula, outnumbered and facing slaughter or enslavement, chose not to surrender. According to the legend, they joined hands and walked into the river together, singing a death chant until the water took all of them. And the hum you hear on calm nights, the locals tell you, is that chant. Still going, still rising off the water. Now, I'm not going to tell you the 1973 encounter was caused by a death song from the 1700s. That's not a claim the evidence can really carry. But here are the facts side by side. This specific river has been associated with an unexplained low hum for 300 years. Two men fishing on it in 1973 said the first thing they noticed was an unexplained hum. Weeks later, the Navy chased down a glowing object under the same water. Different explanations, sure, but it's the same river. It has always been the same river, and it has always been making a sound nobody can fully account for. And finally, the detail that I think is the most haunting in the entire case, and the one that almost no one knew until very recently. That night, October 11th, 1973, a married couple, Maria and Jerry Blair, were parked in their car on the opposite bank of the Pascagoula River. They watched blue lights hover over the water for about 40 minutes. Maria says she saw a gray figure come up out of the river, and then they watched a craft rise from the area across the water, the exact area where Hickson and Parker said they were taken. And the Blairs told no one. For 45 years, Jerry was a skeptic, terrified of being thought insane, and he insisted they keep silent. They watched the whole circus happen across the river, the headlines, the talk shows, the ridicule, and they said nothing. It was not until 2019, with Jerry in the hospital and dying, that he made a confession to his wife. He told her he'd been hiding the worst of it the entire time, that they hadn't only seen lights and a figure. He said the two of them had also been lifted, taken, and examined that same night on their side of the river, and then he died. After his death, Maria came forward, went on the record, and underwent hypnotic regression with the researcher Philip Mantle, describing a second abduction on the same river, on the same night, on the opposite bank. Now, the honest caveat to that, this is a deathbed account recovered decades later, partly through hypnosis from a single surviving witness. By any rigorous standard, it is the kind of evidence you treat with great care. Memory is not a recording, and hypnosis can shape as much as it reveals. A careful person is going to hold this loosely, but a careful person also doesn't get to pretend it isn't there. Because even if part of it is true, it means Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker were not the only ones. It means that on a clear, bright, moonlit night in October 1973, on a river that has been singing for 300 years, there were people on both banks, and only 2 of them ever said a word. Charles Hickson never wavered. Talk show after talk show, lecture after lecture, year after year. He told the same story with the same details, the same alligator call buzz, the same eyeless gray faces. He claimed 3 more silent telepathic contacts in 1974. He never got rich. In his later years, people in Gautier, Mississippi would see him sitting in a folding chair on the public sidewalk, selling copies of his own book to anyone who walked by. He died in 2011 at 80, telling the same story to the end. Calvin Parker ran from it for most of his life, and then, late, turned around and faced it. He published his account in 2018. He stood at the historical marker the city put up at the site in 2019. He authorized his final testimonies to be released after he was gone. He died in August of 2023 at 68, having spent 50 years carrying a single hour. Both men are gone now. So are Jerry Blair and, by the most likely reading, most of the deputies who sat in that station and listened to a hidden tape and felt the hair go up on their arms. What's left is the file, the matching accounts, the polygraph that said he believed it, the radiation check in an Air Force base that shouldn't have happened, the service station call logged before the men ever came in, the Navy SEAL sent to chase a light under the water, a second witness on the far bank who waited until his last breath to speak, and a river that has been making an unexplained sound since before the United States existed. Here's where the 2 sides finally stand. The skeptic has the better burden of proof and the worst single piece of evidence, because no theory that calls these men liars has ever been able to walk into that empty room at midnight and explain the tape. The believer has the tape and the consistency and 50 years of unwavering testimony, and has never once been able to produce the one thing that would end the argument. A craft, a body, a bolt, anything you could hold in your hand. So the biggest unanswered question isn't really what came out of the water. It's a quieter one. 2 ordinary, sober working men with nothing to gain and one of them with everything to lose walked into a sheriff's office at 11 o'clock at night, 50 years ago, and described in matching detail something that should not exist. And then, alone in a locked room, believing no one in the world was listening, said the same thing to each other that they'd said to the police. If they made it up, it is the most committed lie in the history of the subject, sustained by one man for decades, and fled from by the other for just as long. And if they didn't, then on a bright night in October, on the singing river, something came up out of the dark, took 2 men into the light, looked them over, and put them back, and it never told them why. Now, every case that comes through the show gets a rating on the directive scale now, 1 through 5, and the rating is not a score for how scary it is. It's more of like an instruction for how you should react about it. Pascagoula River encounter, I am issuing a Directive 4. Directive 4 means this: you do not have to believe it, but you are not allowed to dismiss it. The tape closed that door. So the next time you're somewhere quiet and dark, somewhere right up against deep water, and you hear a sound off the surface you can't quite place, a hum, a hiss, a low throb like a swarm a long way off, you're not allowed to just explain it away. Not right away. You need to stop and listen and consider just for a moment that the river might be singing, and that on at least one night, 50 years ago, on both banks at once, something sang back. Now, Directive 13 remains where it has always remained, unissued, held in reserve. Some things we don't say out loud, and we never will. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of Paranormal Directive 13 on the Pascagoula Abduction. I've been kind of dying to get back into aliens. Aliens are one of my favorite topics. They're one of my favorite types of stories to cover. So I wanted to do some other things, some hauntings and some cryptids, because we hadn't done that in a long time. But I felt the itch to get back to aliens already. So here we are. Pascagoula is a weird one because it's really quick. You know, these 2 guys get taken, they get the scan, and then they're back. There's not a ton of long lingering evidence of the abduction itself. Calvin Parker went on to live what sounds like a relatively miserable, panicked life because of what happened to him this night. And neither of them really made any money. Even Hickson, who went on the talk shows and stuff, like I said, he never became rich. He didn't, he wasn't able to live off of this money that he made from doing these things. And really, that tape recording, you can hear the fear and the terror in their voices. And I hinted at this in the episode. Even if Hickson had a thought and an idea that maybe they were recording, it was one hell of an acting job by Calvin Parker. So I tend to lean towards the tape is genuine and they really saw something that night. But anyway, if you like the show, please go leave a rating, leave a review, share the show. Whatever podcast app you use, it takes literally 10 seconds to just click the star rating. 5 stars would be amazing. And try to leave a review if you have the time, if you can, because that's what really helps me know what I'm doing well, what I'm not doing well, anything like that. So leave a rating and review and share the show with anyone who likes this sort of stuff, who's into aliens or cryptids or conspiracies or ghosts or anything. Share the show. Let's get this out there to new people. Check out the social medias, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, all at Paranormal Directive 13, of course. Check out the Patreon, patreon.com/Paranormal Directive 13, where for $5 a month, you can get a shout out on the show. There's ad-free episodes, and coming soon, there will be more mini-sodes on there. I just recently bought a portable microphone for my cell phone with my TikTok money. So that was cool. And so I'm going to be able to use that to record some mini-sodes while I'm on the go. So that'll be nice. So make sure to check that out. And just remember, the next time you're at a river on a bright moonlit night and you hear a buzz coming from the water, take a look around and see if there's something in the sky.
While every other channel is fighting for your customers' attention, podcasts are where they've already given it. No one accidentally listens to a podcast for 45 minutes. They choose to be here. They trust the voice in their ears, and when that voice talks about your brand, it doesn't sound like advertising. It sounds like a recommendation from a friend. Acast gives you that trust at scale. Digital precision, host-read authenticity, and performance data that proves it worked. Don't fight for attention. Buy it with Acast. Learn more by visiting acast.com/advertise.